Hello, this is Drew Hill, and I was just going to give some fairly last minute analysis on the bracket. Obviously, we've already had the first four games, which saw Alabama State, North Carolina, Mount St. Mary's, and Xavier win and advance to the round of 64. But I did want to give some analysis on some of the different matchups, some of the potential upsets I'm looking at, and some different probabilities for who can win. So, first thing is in regards actually to the selection, I still think that West Virginia should have made it over North Carolina. And you say, well, why is that? North Carolina won, they won in a blowout. Doesn't that prove that they should have been the team selected? Well, I would argue not necessarily, because once the bracket is set, what happens with the selection of the bracket really has no bearing on the results themselves, other than it can provide motivation. But once the teams are in their path, anybody can win. Every team is facing the game ahead of them. Trying to find their path to get as far as they can go. But that doesn't change the results of the season. Who should have gotten in? I don't think it's quite as big a deal as some of the outcry that has been generated. For example, this is not the same as when Florida State got left out of the college football playoff despite being undefeated. West Virginia only had 19 wins. They had, I think, 13 losses as well. A team like Boise had losses, so it's not like this was not preventable. But I do think North Carolina getting in was the wrong choice, just because, as far as I know, I think they only beat one team that made the tournament, maybe one of the smaller one bid league teams in non-conference. But the only win over a team in the tournament that I can think of off the top of my head was UCLA. You look at a team like Boise, who beat several Mountain West teams, plus Clemson and St. Mary's. You look at West Virginia, look at a team like West Virginia, who beat Gonzaga, Iowa State, and Arizona. I think that is part of the reason, but generates a lot of highlights. Controversy generates views, so North Carolina getting in definitely helps get more views and get more revenue for the NCAA. But since they've already advanced, they're in the bracket. Let's actually talk about the teams that did make the bracket. Want to start with potential first round upsets, just kind of analyzing some of the different matchups and things like that. The one seeds this year are really strong, and a lot of people are saying this could be a really chalky bracket. I do think that's possible. I think it's likely we see, at least one of the ones lose somewhere, but I don't really see a chance for any of the ones to lose in the first round. You look at the ones in the past, and obviously only 2 losses all time. And the ones that did lose had some weaknesses. Virginia had an injury. Has always been more of a defensive, slower team versus an offensive team. And then Purdue had some questions defensively. But this year, I just think these teams are very complete, very well-rounded, and I don't see anyone losing in the first round. The twos are a little more vulnerable, but I don't actually see a 15 over 2 here either, although we didn't necessarily see the 15s winning the last time either. If I had to pick a 2 that was most vulnerable, I would say overall it would be St. John's, just because the offense is not great, especially for a 2 seed. Led to a lot of close games, but Rick Pitino really doesn't lose in the first round. Has hardly done it, and I think half the times he did were actually with Iona the last couple of years. So I think St. John's should get past the first round. I would say the most likely would actually be Bryant over Michigan State. Obviously, Tom Izzo is a great coach in March, but Bryant, I think, is probably the best of the 15 seeds, at least in terms of matching up with a 2 seed. They have a couple former high major guards, including Earl Timberlake. So if there is one that's potentially interesting, I would say that one, especially since Michigan State is a little more balanced offensively than St. John's, but does have some of the same issues. Not quite as good defensively, but very good defensively, pretty good offensively. The threes is where it actually gets a little bit more interesting. Ranking them in order, I would say Texas Tech is the least likely to get upset here. UNCW has been really good at winning close games, but I just don't think this is the best matchup for them. But the other 3 provide some interest. A lot of people looking at Wisconsin as a team that played on Sunday in the Big Ten Championship. Turned around, has to get to Denver for one of the first games of the day today, Thursday. But this Montana team shot well this year, but has not done super well in previous March incidents, despite similar stats coming in, and actually ranks on KenPom as one of the luckiest teams in the country, if not the luckiest. Generally speaking, that team tends to lose early on. So I think Wisconsin is the second most likely to win. The other two is where it gets really interesting, and I think you could rank them either one in terms of being vulnerable. I actually expect one of these two to lose potentially. First would be Iowa State versus Lipscomb. Iowa State has done very well against mid majors under TJ Otzelberger, but they are missing a key starter in Keyshawn Gilbert, will be out for the tournament. They haven't fared particularly well down the stretch. Hasn't come into the tournament with a lot of momentum, lost several games in their last few. Um, and Lipscomb, actually, some of their strengths are things Iowa State thrives on, causing for weaknesses in their opponents. Lipscomb very good at the free throw line, doesn't foul a lot, and doesn't turn it over a lot. One thing Iowa State relies on is getting to the free throw line consistently and forcing a lot of turnovers. And so I do think Iowa State, as a high major team, should be able to get past those weaknesses and win. But I think this is one of the upsets to consider if you're looking for a major upset in your bracket. The other one is Kentucky versus Troy. Troy, not a particularly good shooting team, but Kentucky is not a good defensive team, and we have seen the last couple of years that a team that is really strong on one end of the floor but weak on the other can be upset early due to that weakness. Purdue has had some defensive struggles the last couple of years, and before last year it had some upsets early. Kentucky was not good defensively last year, lost first round. And also this Kentucky team dealing with a lot of injuries. Jackson Robinson's out. Lamont Butler will probably not be 100%. Assuming he does play, I'm thinking he will. Missing some other key pieces. So this is an injury-prone team with a major weakness on the defensive end, who has also been inconsistent down the stretch with the injuries they've dealt with. So Sunbelt has produced some upsets in the past, got an upset last year. So I'd say, either Troy or Lipscomb could be a team to consider picking to pull an upset. Moving to the 4-13s, this is where it gets really interesting. Last year, the most hyped 4 seed was Auburn, and they lost the first round to Yale. Has seemed like that the last couple of years, that the most hyped, 12/5 or 13/4 upset that you would expect for the team that's supposed to pull the upset loses. And then you see the team that's the most hyped to go deep, that's the higher seed, is the one that actually gets upset. If that does happen, I would say the most hyped 4 seed is probably Maryland. I've been kind of low key high on them for a little while as a dark horse, but I do think they don't have a lot of depth. They're very reliant on their starting lineup, which is a very good starting lineup. But I do think they should win this one. The matchup, though, is going to be a tough one. You can't sleep on Grand Canyon. They did pull an upset last year, brought back a lot of the key contributors from that team. So this is a good Grand Canyon team who's got a taste of March Madness and an upset before. So that's, I would say, the least likely to happen. But any of these 4-13s feel possible, where, say, the 1s and 2s and maybe a couple of the 3s didn't. But obviously anything is possible. This is March Madness we're talking about. I would say the other 3 are definitely on high upset alert. The team that's the most hyped to get upset is probably Purdue versus High Point. Neither one is very good at defense. Both are very offensive-focused teams, and so some people pointed that out as a reason why Purdue might get upset if they can't stop High Point. However, I think the same limitations apply to High Point, where they are a very good offensive team, but are they going to be able to stop Purdue? And as I mentioned, sometimes the most hyped upset is the one that doesn't happen. So I'm actually not picking High Point in several of these. Most of my brackets, I'm picking Purdue to win this one, but that is definitely one to consider, and I would not actually be that surprised either way. I think that could be a close game. One game that's not getting a lot of interest is Arizona-Akron. Arizona, though, has had some troubles even in recent years. 2 years ago, lost in the first round to Princeton. So they say not to do this, but there are some teams where when they consistently get upset, or at least have early exits in the tournament, sometimes I do like to look at those teams as potential upsets in later tournaments, because if it happens repeatedly, it might not just be a one-time fluke. It could be a system that just tends to be more likely to produce upsets in March. It might be just the types of players that come to the program. It might be a coaching issue. So Arizona has struggled to make deep runs despite talent, and I feel like this is probably the least talented of Tommy Lloyd's teams at Arizona, and so far he hasn't got past the Sweet 16. Akron is a run and gun team, so this could get really high scoring. That would tend to favor Arizona, but if Akron's making their shots, that this could be a definite upset. And just based on Arizona's track record the last few years, that's actually one I'm picking in quite a few brackets. One that is getting a lot of interest because it was in this top left-hand corner region last year, where Yale as a 13 beat a 4-seed SEC team. People aren't sleeping on them this year. Texas A&M, they don't shoot well, but they rebound really well. Yale, though, does have the experience, and similar to how sometimes you pick on the teams that tend to lose, you can also pick conferences that tend to produce upsets. So for a while, Conference USA was producing a lot of upsets. They've kind of been taken down the last couple of years just due to conference realignment. But, the Ivy's gotten wins the last couple of years, so this is a conference that could potentially pick an upset this year. I think Texas A&M wins this one, but I would not be too surprised either way. Just I think their size, and even with the shooting struggles, just how well they get to the glass, is going to help them. But this region could definitely see a 12 versus a 13 in the second round, with the chance to advance the Sweet 16 for one of them. Because moving right into our 5-12s, the 12 here is probably the best 12 in the tournament. UC San Diego went 30-4. Had some serious at-large hype if they were to lose. I don't think they would have quite made it, so it's a good thing they won their conference tournament, because this is a team we definitely wanted to see. They're a little bit undersized, and they're going up against Michigan, who has been rolling a Twin Towers team all year with Danny Wolf and Vladislav Golden. Danny Wolf kind of runs almost as a point forward in a big man's body, runs a lot of pick and rolls with Golden, and that's been tough for teams to stop. Michigan's big weakness, though, is turnovers, and UC San Diego forces a lot of turnovers. And Michigan did win the Big Ten tournament. Before that, they had kind of finished the year on a slump, so I actually could definitely see this one. This is one of those ones where it is a very hyped 12/5, but there are good reasons for it, so I'm picking this in quite a few matchups to be the 12/5. Moving over to the East, Oregon versus Liberty. This is also a pretty popular one, but Dana Altman's been a pretty good coach in March for Oregon. They don't tend to lose early. But they don't go down without a fight. They've actually been a pretty consistent Sweet 16 team when he does get a team in, especially when they're a lower seed and can surprise a few people. Last year had a really exciting game with Creighton to go to the Sweet 16, which they ultimately lost. But Oregon, definitely not a team you can count on March with Dan Altman in command. Liberty hits a ton of threes, but they don't have a lot of size either, going up against Oregon with Nate Biddle. So I'm actually taking Oregon in most of my brackets with that one. Memphis, Colorado State. Memphis had a really good year, challenged themselves with a really strong non-conference, played well against that, but they will be without Tyrese Hunter most likely, and I think that could hurt them. And they're going up against one of the hottest teams in the nation, Colorado State, led by Nick Clifford. Colorado State is from the Mountain West. The last couple of years, Mountain West has gotten teams in to the tournament, but hasn't thrived particularly well. I think this year, with the injury Memphis has, their tendency to play down to their competition, a lot of close games with teams in their conference after they'd gotten big wins in the non-conference. I think this could lead to a win for Colorado State here. And then Clemson McNeese. This is one of the ones that feels like it won't be an upset because Clemson's probably the best of the fives, in my opinion. Most likely to make a deep run, could cause a lot of trouble for the 1 seed Houston here, I think, just due to their bigs. They've got veteran guards. Chase Hunter is a beast. Played last year. They went to the Elite Eight. And I could see them kind of doing the Miami, go to the Elite Eight, and follow that up with a Final Four run the next year. Honestly, they could be a really good dark horse Final Four team. But, that 5-12, that team that you think is going to be the deep run, sometimes tends to be the one that loses. And this McNeese team is no joke. Will Wade has resurrected his coaching career to the point where he is either he's widely expected to be taking the NC State job. I don't know if that's quite official yet, but I wonder if that could provide a distraction. But still, this McNeese team, loaded with a lot of talent. Former SEC and Big East player Brandon Murray, and he's not even the best player on the team. So definitely could see McNeese pulling an upset here. Clemson's a really strong team, though. In my official bracket, I think I did have McNeese to the Sweet 16, actually, because even if Purdue gets past High Point, I don't really see them as a deep team just with their defensive issues. So I don't see them getting past the second round. So whoever wins this matchup, I'm probably taking over the winner of the other matchup. But I could definitely see this going either way, and I think Clemson could provide problems for even Houston, or Gonzaga, whoever, or Georgia even, whoever comes out of that top half or top quarter of this region. Moving to the 6-11s, 11 seeds actually have a winning record, I think, against sixes the last 4 years. So definitely could see upsets here. Honestly, could see all of the sixes losing. Could see all the sixes potentially winning. VCU BYU is a really tough one to pick. VCU definitely a really good veteran team, good defensively. Just a lot of fourth and fifth year players. BYU though has been one of the hottest teams in the country. Shoots the ball extremely well. Did have an early exit last year as a 6 seed versus an 11 from the A10. So that could go either way. I'm taking VCU to the Sweet 16 in a lot of my brackets, including the official one I have here on my channel. So I definitely could see that going either way. One team, I've been low on them all year preseason. They're getting a lot of hype. They're getting a lot of hype midseason. And I've kind of said I think they're going to be, at best, second round team, and that's Illinois, just because very inconsistent. A freshman-led team, they can get really hot offensively and explode for massive point totals, but I don't see them stopping anybody. They will be playing Xavier after Xavier won against Texas in the first 4. I like Xavier in that one. At least one team from the first 4 has won a game in every year since the first 4 was introduced, except for, I think it was 2021, 2022. It's been every year except for one, so I'm expecting one team to advance. Could actually see both the 11 seeds moving on this year, but I don't trust Illinois, so I'm expecting Xavier to win that one. Missouri Drake is a tough one. Drake came in 30-3, one of the best teams in the country. They play at a slow pace, so that keeps you in the game. Also can lead to a lot of closer games, so that's partly why some of their predicted metrics aren't as high as you'd expect from a 30-3 team, with multiple Power 5 wins, I might add, including over Vanderbilt. Missouri, though, ranks really highly. They are a really good team, could be a dark horse. Almost everybody is picking Drake here, and I am picking Drake here as well. And that's despite the fact I think Missouri might be a little underrated. And despite that, though, I still think Drake is good enough to take this win. They've got a couple close calls the last few years, haven't quite got over the hump in the first round. I see them doing that this year against Missouri under Ben McCollum. And then our other 6-11, it's going to be North Carolina versus Ole Miss. Chris Beard has been a really good coach, especially in March. But both Ole Miss and I guess Missouri as well did have quite a few losses in their towards the end of the season, playing in the tough SEC conference. So could see this one going either way. North Carolina, not a particularly great defensive team, but when they get hot, they can move on, and they've played very well. Not against the toughest of schedules. They gotten several wins against teams that missed the tournament, but lost to Duke twice down the stretch. But as we saw in their first game against San Diego State in the tournament, they can get hot and beat anybody. So could see either that going either way. I'm actually going to take Ole Miss, though, I think, although I could definitely see North Carolina winning. 7-10s. The weird thing with this bracket is overall, I think it's very top-heavy, where there's an obvious tier where the 1 seeds are, and then pretty close, you got the 2 seeds. They have a few more flaws. But then there's a big drop-off towards the middle. Like, the middle is fairly weak, so you can see a lot of upsets in the middle. This could be fairly chalky with 1s and 2s, and then you also see like a couple 12s or something in the Sweet 16, or a couple 11s. And by one computer metric, the 8s are actually better. They rank better than the 5 seeds. So it's like if you don't get the 1 seeds in the second round, then they're more likely to get to the Elite 8 almost. I think the 8-9s are also probably better than several of these 7-10s. So despite the fact that I think the 2 seeds have more weaknesses, it's harder to see them necessarily, perhaps losing in the second round. But just give you a quick run through of my picks for these. UCLA, Utah State. I actually think UCLA wins this one. Mick Cronin's been a pretty good coach in March with UCLA. Utah State's going to be a tough team, but they built up their resume so well in the early part of the season that they kind of it almost felt like they just didn't need as many of the wins that most of the mid majors needed down the stretch, so they didn't play as quite as well. So I actually think UCLA does win that one. St. Mary's Vanderbilt could go either way. I'm taking the St. Mary's. Marquette, New Mexico. Just like I said, the Mountain West hasn't done super well the last few years in the first round of the NCAA tournament, so I'm actually going to take Marquette here. Didn't play particular down the stretch after a really good start to the season, but they've got some veteran guards. I think they get to the second round, face Michigan State. And then Kansas, Arkansas, I could see that going either way. Kansas, preseason #1 team, has never made the Sweet 16 as in a year where they were the preseason #1, interestingly enough. They've got the experience, but they just are very inconsistent, so you don't know what version you're getting. Arkansas has been very hot down the stretch and turned their season around after it looked like they were done for after starting out 0-5 in conference play. So I think Arkansas actually gets past Kansas here in the Battle of Calipari versus Bill Self to set up a matchup with Rick Pitino in the second round. 8-9s, Louisville, I think they're underseeded. Pat Kelsey, though, has made the tournament 3 times before, hasn't done particularly well. Had some trendy upset picks when he was at Charleston and Winthrop, and none of those teams made a great impression. Obviously, with more resources, better team now at Louisville, that could change, and especially because it's almost a home game, not too far away at Rupp Arena. But I'm actually going to take Creighton in that one. Mississippi State Baylor, that's a toss-up. I picked them in several. I don't even remember for sure which one I picked for the official YouTube bracket. Probably Mississippi State. Could be Baylor, I guess. I think that'd go either way. Mississippi State was actually my dark horse preseason Final Four team. And then pretty much all my Final Four teams would be dark horses now, so I don't know about that. UConn, Oklahoma. UConn's pretty much, same with Gonzaga, pretty much unanimous favorites. So I almost wonder if you could see the other team coming back in that one and kind of shocking. I think it's more likely with Georgia Gonzaga, just despite the fact that Gonzaga ranks really high in predictive metrics, loaded team, longest Sweet 16 streak. Georgia has a lot of size that could give them problems, but I actually do think Gonzaga and UConn both advance. So that gives us our first round. Most likely for a 1 seed to lose in the second round, probably Houston. I don't think Gonzaga matches up particularly well. They have a veteran guard with Ryan Nebhard, but Houston's going to be tough to stop rebounding-wise. They're going to be a relentless athletic team, and we've seen Gonzaga struggle in the past against athletic teams with a lot of good guards that come at you. So I think I picked Gonzaga in a couple. I picked Houston a couple. I'm taking Houston here, I think, over Gonzaga. So like I said, I think they match up better. Second most likely, a big story with Duke is, how well is Cooper Flagg going to be? Is he even going to play against the 16 seed, save him for the 8-9 matchup? Could a team like Mississippi State, muddy it up, get physical? Josh Hubbard goes off, they keep it close. I think Mississippi State is more likely to keep it close with Duke than Baylor, but I don't know for sure which one is going to be playing Duke, assuming Duke does get past the 16 seed, of course. Auburn could be a tricky one. They do defend the three-point line very well, and both Louisville and Creighton rely on three, so I think Auburn gets past either one. Odds are very good, though, that at least one seed would lose. We did see all the 1 seeds make Sweet 16 last year, but that's not super common. As for which one it would be, Florida, UConn, or Oklahoma would be interesting. I just think Florida is too complete a team to get stopped here. UConn can get hot, obviously, but not good defensively at all. So, like I said, I think probably the most likely is Houston, despite the matchup problems I think they can propose for Gonzaga. I think Auburn got the toughest 8-9 matchup. Like either alternative could be really good. I don't know. Georgia potentially too, I guess, could be a very tough matchup with Gonzaga, but I actually think all the ones could win. One of them will probably lose, but picking which one, tough to know for sure. In terms of the 2-7s, Tennessee, I mentioned in a previous video that they're one of the 4 teams who I think can win the championship this year, but despite the fact they made the Elite 8 last year behind the dynamic play of Dalton Knecht, this is still a Rick Barnes Tennessee team, and they usually follow up, a Sweet 16 or Elite 8 run or whatever with a second round exit. So, despite the fact that I could arguably put them in the Final Four just based on their talent, they have tended to have cold stretches despite the offensive improvements from past Rick Barnes Tennessee teams. This is a defense first team though. That potential matchup with UCLA, everyone's sleeping on and just assuming Tennessee would move on, but second round exit early to a tough, also defensive minded UCLA team is not something to sleep on. So that's why I'm actually picking Tennessee to lose in the second round, despite the fact that I think they are probably the second most complete team in this region behind Houston. St. John's, like I said, is probably the most vulnerable 2 seed just because of the offensive insufficiencies. Rick Pitino obviously is a really good coach, and a lot of people are basing their pick for St. John's on their respect for him. But I do think this is a game that St. John's could potentially lose to either team in the second round. So I actually have Gonzaga, or I think I have Arkansas at the Sweet 16 in my official YouTube bracket. Michigan State, trusting Tom Izzo, generally works out pretty well in March, so I could see them to this. I think I'm going to pick them in the Sweet 16 in most of my brackets. Marquette hasn't done particularly well the last couple of years under Shaka Smart in the tournament. So give me Michigan State to the Sweet 16 there. And then Alabama, I think they match up pretty well with either Vanderbilt or St. Mary's. I think they would get past either one. I actually like Alabama's path to the Elite Eight quite a lot compared to the other 2 seeds. I'd say the most vulnerable here are probably Tennessee and St. John's. Second round, like I said, most of these 3 seeds feel pretty vulnerable. Texas Tech, you're either getting an underrated Missouri team or, at that point, a 31-win Drake team. Funny thing is, Texas Tech actually has a former Drake player, Overton, as a transfer, so be a little mini revenge game for him. So that could go either way, and that's probably the best 3 seed. Iowa State matching up with a Power 5 team in UNC or Ole Miss. That could get interesting. Maybe Iowa State would do better since it's not a team from their own conference. But playing a physical game against Ole Miss, against a coach that Iowa State knows well, former Texas Tech coach and Texas coach. So that could get interesting. Wisconsin versus BYU or VCU. I actually think I would take the 6 or the 11. Just not trusting Wisconsin this year. They've definitely improved on offense, still have some weaknesses defensively. And this matchup down here, I don't know. Kentucky doesn't play that great a defense. Illinois doesn't play that great a defense. Xavier's an offensive-minded team. So anything can come out of there. It's going to be an offensive battle. Defense is optional, I feel like, in that little pod. So I think give me Xavier. I'm going to take an 11 out of the first 4 to the Sweet 16. It's happened several times before. As for our 4s and 5s, I feel like the most likely to get a double-digit Sweet 16 team would be either in the South or the Midwest, where you have Yale and UC San Diego as potential upset teams. Michigan, I just think they have too many turnover problems to be a real threat. I could see them getting past Yale or something in the second round if they win and then Texas A&M loses, but I feel like Texas A&M is the surest bet to the Sweet 16 out of there. But if both teams lose and you get a 12-13, UC San Diego to the Sweet 16 would be really fun. Or Yale. And then in the Midwest, like I said, Clemson's probably the safest, which means they're probably the most likely to get upset. And then Purdue, there's a lot of hype around them potentially losing, so I could see a Sweet 16 double-digit seed out of there. I don't see both Oregon and Arizona losing. I feel like one of them is going to win, and I'm guessing Oregon, so I'm taking Oregon to the Sweet 16 out of that region. And then Memphis at full strength, I think they can play with anybody. But I think with that, with the loss of Tyrese Hunter, I have them losing Colorado State. Like I said, Maryland, most hyped 4 seed. But there's a reason for it. I think they're probably the most likely bet to go to the Sweet 16 out of there. Potential, pass to the Elite Eight. Duke probably got, at least on paper, the easiest 8-9. And potential matchup with Arizona and Oregon. I feel like a lot of people are going to be penciling Duke in. You could argue Duke got the easiest region. Houston, I could argue for 2 potentially, but their 5 seed is better. Their 8 seed is better. The 2 seed, I would argue, you go either way on that. So, but Duke to the Elite Eight, definite possibility. Obviously, the overwhelming likelihood. the only losses Duke has suffered this year came in really close games when Cooper Flagg slipped. So if they can get him some shoes that won't slip, I mean, Duke's going to be tough to beat, assuming that he's back to full health. Houston or Gonzaga, like I said, I think that Clemson matchup's tough. I don't really see McNeese, Purdue, or High Point posing that much of a threat. So those are the three teams I think get to the Final Four out of this region if it's not Tennessee overcoming, the typical Rick Barnes team. So, yeah, I think Clemson is one of the few teams that really matches up well against Houston just with the bigs and the veteran guard play, even better than Gonzaga, I would say. But then that's assuming Clemson does get to the Sweet 16. So, Florida's a really complete team. Maryland's going to be a tough opponent, assuming both teams do get to Sweet 16. And the fourth one seed has not fared particularly well the last few years. 2021, we saw Michigan get to the Elite Eight, but I think every fourth one seed since then has lost before this, either Sweet 16 or before. So, with first round exit by Purdue, second round exit by Baylor, and the Sweet 16 exit by North Carolina last year, Florida does feel like arguably the most complete team in the tournament besides maybe Duke or Auburn. So they're definitely getting the most hype too, which makes me nervous. But I think Florida's the safe pick here, but Maryland's probably the second biggest threat. If Memphis can play to their full potential even without Hunter, they're going to be a threat as well. Bottom half, I just think anything can happen because everyone's assuming St. John's because the hype is real. That storyline is there. Rick Pitino is, going to coach his 16 of the Final Four. I just don't see them getting as far just due to offensive inconsistencies. So Texas Tech, interesting choice here. Could you see a Cinderella? That's not really a Cinderella, similar to FAU a couple years ago, like a 31-win Drake moving on. Is John Calipari going to redeem himself? Is Kansas going to make a nice run? Is Missouri being slept on so much for Drake that they're going to make a big run? I think anything can happen there. So this region, it feels like it's Florida's to lose, but I would say it's the toughest region. Most people would probably agree. So that one's going to be an interesting one. Auburn, they did lose to Texas A&M, and I think that's the blueprint to beating Auburn is you got to beat them on the boards, win the rebounding battle. It's going to be hard to win a shootout with them. Alabama did it, but Texas A&M did beat them, and that's the blueprint they took is they just pounded them on the boards. So I think Texas A&M is the most likely to give Auburn problems. Michigan could with their bigs, but like I said, the turnover problems I think are going to come back to bite them. So assuming Auburn gets the Sweet 16, A&M would be a tough matchup, but then they have their own shooting problems. So I do like Auburn to the Elite Eight. Then looking at the bottom half of each region, we already looked, I guess, at the West. South, Michigan State's tough to bet against with Tom Izzo, but UNC making a big run wouldn't surprise me. Iowa State, they've played pretty well despite the injuries. They haven't won a lot of the games when they were dealing with the injuries, but they make their runs and they keep themselves in most games. So they could find a new level, move on. Michigan State probably the safest team here. Second safest honestly might be Ole Miss. Though with just Chris Beard's track record as well. So then like I said, I don't know if I fully trust Tennessee. If I do trust them to get past UCLA, getting to the Elite Eight and maybe the Final Four isn't too big of a step from there. Whatever offensive wonder kid comes out of the region above there, that could be an interesting clash in styles versus the defensive mind UCLA or Tennessee, assuming it's not Utah State or Wofford. East is going to be interesting because, like I said, I don't fully trust Wisconsin. BYU or VCU, I think, could make a deep run. Either one could beat Bama. I do like Bama's path to the Elite Eight, but could see a Cinderella out of there. Bama versus Duke would be an exciting one, but there's a reason why Duke's the favorite out of the East. There's been at least one 5-seed or lower in the Final Four, I think, for 10 straight years. So they have, with how good the 1 seeds, though, this is the year they said it could be like 08, which is the only year where all 4 1 seeds made the Final Four, but I don't see that happening. Florida and Duke feel like the most complete, safest teams. Florida's playing in the toughest region, and like I said, they're the 4th 1 seed. Duke probably got the easiest region, but they could match up with Alabama in the Elite Eight. Houston, I I could argue also maybe got the easiest region, but they've got a tough match with Gonzaga in the second round. If Gonzaga beats Georgia, could play Clemson or Purdue in the Elite Eight or in the Sweet 16. Tough Tennessee team in the Elite Eight is possible, or you're facing an offensive a team that's probably been hot if they're that far in Kentucky or Illinois or Xavier. So I would say the most likely might be that Midwest region, just because Gonzaga or Clemson I think could be a really tough out for Houston. Auburn's got 3 losses in their last 4 games, so do they turn it back up to the level they hit earlier in the season, or are they kind of in a slump? Michigan State and Auburn feel like one of the you're picking one of the two there to go to the Final Four, but if Auburn does hit a slump and Michigan State's shooting troubles come back to bite them, that could be a region where you see an upset and a surprise team come out. Ultimately, I think for my YouTube bracket I had Michigan State, Duke, Florida, and Houston. Or did I have Clemson? I think I had Houston. No, I had McNeese to the Sweet 16, so I think I had Houston. Too many brackets and get them mixed up which ones I had where. So Houston, really good team. They're probably the slowest playing of the one season. We have seen that teams that tend to play at a slower pace are more vulnerable to upsets. Potentially, if they don't have like a faster paced team with a good defense, can often outrun smaller teams. Some people picking Houston to win the tournament, but Houston was not ranked in the top 12 of the AP Week 6 poll. So unless they're going to be the second team this century to do that, I don't think Houston wins at all. Florida, Duke, and Auburn, I think it's going to be one of those 3. Like I said, it could also be Tennessee. Gonzaga also fits a lot of the criteria, so they could be, the dark horse, really low seed team that wins it all. But I think it's going to be Duke, Florida, or Auburn. I've picked all of them in several different brackets. I think it's going to be. I think it comes down to Duke versus Florida, and I think it can go either way. But I think it's going to be one of those teams hoisting the trophy at the end of the year. But it's going to be an exciting tournament, a lot to look forward to, and just hope against hope that your team is not on the wrong end of a Cinderella story, or if you're cheering for the Cinderella, that they are. Hopefully we do have some upsets and stuff. Just hopefully it's not your team that gets the upset, or that gets upset. So we'll see. It should be a fun, exciting tournament. And thanks for listening, and hopefully you enjoyed it. And you can comment below if you have disagreements, if you have other comments, other teams you're looking at. That's all, and thanks for listening.